what it was like when you experienced your Kundalini awakening.
So initially, it was all this energy I'd built up for months. All of a sudden, above the top of my head, it felt like the hugest orgasm I'd ever experienced, but it was outside my body. And then the next day, this ocean of clear awareness started seeping in through the top of my head. And over the next few days, it became a flood.
Welcome to Jazz Therapy, where we explore the intersectionality of jazz, the psyche and psychoanalytic thought, spirituality, and consciousness. We have in-depth conversations with people from various walks of life, all of whom view their work as a service to humanity. Then we listen to jazz and discuss our thoughts, feelings, and reflections which arise from hearing this incredible art form. I'm your host, Jessie Shapiro. This show is for entertainment and educational purposes only. If you or someone you know is feeling suicidal or in an emotional crisis, you can call or text the SAMHSA crisis line, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Association, through the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Simply call or dial 988 24/7, 365 days a year. My guest today is Rigzin, spiritual mystic devoted to the teachings of Padmasambhava. Padmasambhava was a legendary 8th century Indian Buddhist mystic who introduced Tantric Buddhism to Tibet and who is credited with establishing the first Buddhist monastery there. Before devoting his life to being a mystic, Rigzin was in the army, attended university, and worked as a social worker. For the past decade and a half, he has been on an incredible Kundalini ride. Well, my guest today here is Rigzin, spiritual mystic devoted to the teachings of Padmasambhava. Welcome, Rigzin. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
I thought we might just dive in with what spirituality means to you and what that looks like in your life.
It's a big one.
It is a big one.
Well, in the teachings of Padmasambhava, the view is the perspective of spirituality, the perspective of everything. So everything, this entire moment in its totality is it, without separating this from that, me from other, me from object. Everything without conceptual commentary is it. So, right, without the judgments, without everything. So as I deepen in this, and in 2009, I experienced this Kundalini opening, and it's been going every day since then. So intensity and also gradual deepening over the decade, deepening into just perceiving in an unconditioned way.
Oh, wow. That is so beautiful and deep. And I have so many questions and curiosities. I wonder if you could just tell us about Padmasambhava, who Padmasambhava is, and how you came into your connections. And then I'll follow up on some of the other things you said too.
Padmasambhava is considered to be the second Buddha by the people of the Himalayan regions. He's the founder of the Nyingma lineage of Tibetan Buddhism. And his basis was Vajrayana, or Buddhist Tantra. And of course, Mahayana is the cornerstone of why. What is the motivation? So compassion. And his emphasis, of course, Vajrayana, to be able to be effective in the world, to be able to erase the obstacles to the spread of Buddhism. And his purpose, around 700 AD, he brought it to Tibet. So he's credited with establishing, for the first time, really deeply establishing the roots in Tibet.
His role was really important in spreading Buddhism globally, as well as the teachings that he brought. I wonder if you could tell us about how you were drawn to Padmasambhava, how he came into your life.
This is also around 2009. I was really fascinated with the 6 yogas of Naropa and practicing those from the Kagyu tradition. However, reading the stories of Padmasambhava and his Tibetan consort, Yeshe Tsogyal, and their practices and the amazing ways that they were present and amazing ways that they were able to engage in compassionate action, just really over the years became part of me, ever more deeply in my heart. Like, I feel touched by so many of his stories and resonant. And he wasn't what you might call a regular mainstream sort of Buddhist. He was very crazy wisdom oriented. And so things that he did, may not have made sense to others. And yet in the bigger picture, it made sense.
Can you say more about that in terms of like the way he was different or the way he held his Buddhism?
This is a little tricky because we obviously have had many gurus and masters, from the 60s and 70s, and so many of them ended up being accused of abuse, and whether from Tibetan Buddhism or Hindu yogas. We see this left and right, and so I'm not justifying harmful action. And to someone whose mind has been completely eradicated and they only exist in the totality of the moment, any spontaneous action that comes through them is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Even when I've read stories of Neem Karoli Baba, Ram Dass's guru, some of his actions have seemed pretty crazy. And yet, reading accounts of people who were involved, they say, years later, I noticed that I didn't have any depression anymore, or so on. So crazy wisdom is something that many have tried and aspired to, and it's not that I'm aspiring to that. I'm aspiring to the depth of awakening that it alludes to.
I think I get what you're saying in that sometimes one might say something and it's hard to understand what sort of the context or meaning could be. However, if the spiritual consciousness of the teacher is in such a place that they have a sense or know where it's going to go, then the word or the teaching or whatever that might sound crazy is sort of like appropriate or whatever the moment calls for. Is that kind of right?
Absolutely. Yes. Well worded.
Okay. I'm glad I got that because that's a deep teaching. Can you talk a little bit about how you got on a spiritual path? Like what drew you even to consciously, go down this road? Was there something in your life? Was it an inner calling in your heart, an event in your outside life?
I'm half Chinese, and so I grew up as a child with a lot of Kung Fu movies and stories, and the whole teaching of Kung Fu, mind, body, spirit, one, grasshopper. And so I grew up with that whole idea and was really fascinated with meditation, the Shaolin monks and the Taoist meditations. So when I look back, though, most of my motivation was at that time about power. If I practiced meditation, it was to make my Kung Fu more powerful. It wasn't really about spirituality at that time. And yet a lot of the methods are actually similar. And so years later, 2000, I had actually gotten out of the military. I had gone back to college, received a degree in psychology. And 2000, I discovered there was a teaching nearby where I had just moved to, and a man named Adyashanti was giving a talk, giving a teaching. I remember the first time walking out of there, and I had no idea what had just been expressed. I had no idea. I was saying to myself, didn't make sense at all. It was not logical. I have no idea what went on. I'm not going back. And yet, every week I found myself going back. Something just kept pulling me. And so for about 7 years, I kept going back and spending time with him in his talks, asking questions.
So we could say
That was the beginning.
that was like a spiritual grace, or maybe even a synchronicity, that he just happened to kind of come into your field at that point.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right time, ripe timing. Mm-hmm.
In terms of going and, you mentioned being and hearing his lectures and feeling like you didn't first understand kind of what the message he was conveying was. When did that shift for you, where it started to just feel different? I imagine over the course of 7 years, there was an evolution in terms of yourself, the message you were hearing, how it was landing, all of that.
Well, there was actually a marked difference when I decided to go for a backpacking trip in Yosemite. And I had done hikes like that before. I basically went 15, 20 miles a day.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so there I was.
That's awesome.
Getting there on my first day. Yeah, yeah. Well, such a beautiful area. I was taking off from Tuolumne Meadows, going north on the John Muir Trail, and had settled into Return Creek Canyon. And all of a sudden that night, I was looking at myself. I was reflecting. I was reflecting on things Adyashanti had said. And I said to myself, I've been in such busyness. I was a social worker. So much busyness in my mind, in my daily life, that I haven't had the spaciousness to nurture anything that might have taken root from being in his presence. And so I made a decision, you know what? I'm going to just be spacious. Every other day, I made a compromise with myself. So every other day I did 15, 20 miles. And then the days I didn't, I just hung out. I sat, hung out around camp, put my feet in the creeks. And so after I was out there about a week, and the days that I just sat, something was happening. There was, it's wordless, really. But so trying to assign words to this experience, it feels like it minimizes it, but for the sake of communicating here, there was a sense of spaciousness opening up, being out in the wilderness, no electric, no Wi-Fi, just sitting, being present. That was it, just being present with so much spaciousness. I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't even meditating. I was just sitting, just hanging out. Everything starts bubbling up. Thoughts, feelings get louder and louder and louder until literally feels like they're shouting inside my head. And I just kept sitting through it all. And all of a sudden, in this one moment, it all dissolved. It felt like my brain dissolved. That was the physical sensation. Felt like my brain dissolved.
Mm.
And then the result was that everything went quiet, internal quiet.
Wow.
And from that moment, there wasn't a sense of I. There wasn't a sense of doing. There was a continuous hanging out. I remember maybe 2 days later, I was sitting on a granite rock around a lake, just gazing at the gorgeousness of the scene. The lake, tall cliffs, granite cliffs towering above the lake on all sides, reeds growing in the shallows of the lake. And there was a sensation of a physical click in my head. And there was no longer any identification with personality, with body. What I was couldn't even be described. And yet descriptive words exist, like empty, spacious, aware, openness that is aware. And that lasted for 3 hours.
Wow. I guess the word that would come to mind to describe it is an ego death. It sounds so almost clinical, in terms of the beauty of the experience you're describing. Just like from what I've read about losing the identification with the self in that time.
And I want to be clear, it wasn't a complete death. It was a temporary seeing through.
Mm-hmm.
After 3 hours, I slammed back into the sense of self and all the suffering.
Wow.
And for the next 7 years, being a stressed out social worker, but going to Adyashanti whenever I could. And just continuing until karma came along that enabled me to let go of the stressful lifestyle. And I decided finally to just sit, to continue to meditate with all the time that I had. That plus Buddhist pranayama called Tumo.
It sounds like the experience you had gave you a taste of what you were, I guess aspiring isn't even the right word, because I know you will tell me that there's really nothing to aspire to. I guess it gave you a taste of the true nature of ourselves that was almost like a signpost to continue you on in your path.
Yeah, and there is aspiration. Aspiration to see through suffering.
That's so amazing too that you were in nature, and I can just imagine being in beautiful Yosemite and sitting in nature, and there is something that is so deeply nourishing to us when we're out, when you're doing that kind of deep work.
Mm-hmm.
I also wanted to say too, for like, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I found the most powerful experiences when I was completely clear of EMFs, electricity, Wi-Fi fields, all that.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. That kind of distracting vibration in the field. And you mentioned Adyashanti, and he's a pretty renowned spiritual teacher. Oprah interviewed him on her book club for, I think he's probably written several books. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I have devoured those books.
So after your kind of initial awakening, and where you got this sense of kind of all that is, and feeling like you didn't have any identification anymore, you said there was continued period of 7 years. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that period and then what happened next, since you mentioned your Kundalini awakening in 2009. And I sense there was still some time and things that happened in that period of 7 years.
Oh, yeah. It felt like what Tibetans would call a purification period. A period when I was in hope and fear. Fear of losing my job, because then how am I going to pay my rent and bills and all of that? Hope, hope that my dreams would come true. So I was locked up in identity with hope and fear, which was causing me quite a bit of suffering. Some of my hopes were karate. At that time, I was studying Kenpo karate and had found a teacher that was really, really good. And he, not only taught us all the basics of self-defense, but taught us advanced stuff and practiced in his garage. And it was an absolutely amazing time. And I was really looking forward to becoming a black belt one day.
Well, it sounds like he was
so there were a lot of worldly things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry.
It was going to say, it sounds like he was a spiritual teacher as well, in a way. I mean, although the emphasis was on the physical art and discipline of karate, that your teacher gave you a lot as well.
Yeah. Well, and there was a time when I felt an internal sense of there was a choice. I could continue in my hope, or I could begin this aspiration of really seeing through all my suffering. And that was a sense that was born from listening to Adi Shanti, from having that experience in Yosemite. That something that was born, that sense of freedom, once you've experienced such a beautiful sensation of freedom, of course, the rest of you wants to dive into this as well. It's beautiful, it's sweet, it's pleasurable.
If you'd like to know more, you can visit my website at www.jazztherapy.com. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the states of California and New York. You can also check out my profile page on Psychology Today, which I'll leave linked below. Was the fear you experienced, I know you said it was sort of a choice to really deeply, consciously continue down your path. Was the fear partly about losing yourself or your identity again? I wonder if you could say more about that. I think I've felt that sometimes on the spiritual path, being like, okay, yes, I know I need to lose my ego eventually. And there are many different ways that happens. And then also noticing fear when I have that thought as well. Or just noticing that in the body, like, what does it mean? What is that? What really happens to us when that occurs?
Ultimately, although I didn't know it at the moment, I was just in my identifications. I was in my hopes. I was in my fears. What I wanted, I wanted. I didn't want certain things. I wanted to keep some things away, pull other things to me. Manifesting, how everybody wants to manifest. And ultimately, though, of course, it is that sense of self, the things that we mistakenly think will bring us happiness. And so in that experience in Yosemite, it was a complete dropping away of everything I'd ever thought could bring me happiness. Because that's all in the personality. That's all in the sensation of self. And to have a complete dropping away for 3 hours of a sensation of self and identification with personality, it didn't mean the personality was gone. It didn't even mean that this body was just lying or sitting there. What happened during those 3 hours, some of the things that happened, the body was skipping around trees. The personality was having so much fun. It was giggling and laughing. And yet there was no sense of that is me.
It was just being with that experience and observing it all.
Yeah, they call it the witness.
Mm-hmm.
Although even a witness, a subjective sensation of witness, is self. It may be a subtle level of self. But this was just openness that was also aware and discovering that's what I am.
That's so beautiful. It's such a blessing, or a grace to have that experience. I wonder if you could tell us how you got from this really profound experience in Yosemite to your Kundalini awakening, and just what that was like for you. And I know, again, it's probably something that's hard to even put into words. And I'm grateful that you're even willing to do that, just to give us a taste of what that's like.
Absolutely. Yeah. 2009, there was a ripening of some karma. I was able to let go of the stressful job. I was able to, at that time, discover a beautiful, loving relationship that was so supportive in spiritual advancement. So I discovered initially, having $10,000 saved up, I discovered initially that my desire was to use that money to solidify some sort of concrete income for the future, meaning I was going to get apprenticed, I was going to train. Well, I decided body work at that time. I was going to take advanced body work, um, like deep tissue, trigger point, shiatsu, that kind of thing. And my partner at that time asked me, so I just want to check in. You have a block of time, you have a block of money, you could do anything you want to do. What is your greatest dream? What would you love to do right now? And being honest with myself, it wasn't training in body work. That was coming from the fear. Being honest, since I'd been in junior high, I'd had this dream of sitting in a cave, meditating. It was an image, but it held a lot of charge to me. Well, I ended up giving this massage school quite a bit of my money, most of my savings. And ironically, a week later, they call me and say that for every massage training cycle I signed up for, the first class was canceled. So would I like my money back? And I said, yes, this is a sign.
The universe gave you a rerouting right there, a way out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so from that point on, I decided I'm going to meditate, and it began 8 hours a day. I was studying 6 yogas in Naropa really intensely. I had practiced Tumo in junior high, but not from the Tibetan lineage. It's said actually to be part of the teachings from Bodhidharma, the father of Zen Buddhism, although those teachings don't seem to exist in the Shaolin anymore. They exist in the Taoist tradition now. So in studying that tradition in junior high and practicing the Dumo, although it's not called Dumo there, but later discovering Dumo in 2009, it was the same exact technique I had studied in junior high. So I practiced that for about 4 hours and practice just sitting, not doing for 4 hours. And so essentially my 8 hours a day.
So first of all, that is so amazing that you even had this calling since junior high. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about what Tumo is. I have a little bit of an understanding of it. I think it'd be really helpful to hear from you about this practice.
Absolutely. So in Padmasambhava's left hand in a lot of the statues, he's carrying a skull bowl filled with the nectar of bliss with a little vase, they call it the vase of immortality, sitting on top of it. And what that represents, the nectar of bliss, is the life force. So you've brought the life force together in the navel chakra and then used it to open the top gate at the top of the head, above the top of the head, to the ocean of pure, clear awareness. And together, these are the essences, sometimes represented as the red and white essences. And so Tumo is the practice of waking up the energy, of bringing it together, igniting the inner fire. There's a lot of YouTubes you could even see of Tibetan monks, documentaries. They're sitting in the snow. They have wet towels draped around their body, around their shoulders. And, in the freezing cold in wet clothes, they're actually drying out these wet clothes with the immense amount of body heat that they have.
I read that.
So
I was like, that's amazing.
Absolutely. And then people like Wim Hof have really rediscovered and, reframed how these practices can help us in our daily life as householders, strengthening the body, the immune system.
This is Wim Hof breathing.
However, though, yes. I do want to go to the fact, though, that Tumo can be used in this way, but originally was meant to be the booster rocket that blasted through all the obstacles, that blasted through the veil all the way to the ocean of clear awareness.
Almost like it would be Kundalini. Used for the Kundalini awakening.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
So you were practicing meditation for 8 hours a day, half of it Tumo practice and half of it just kind of sitting and being.
So that kind of evolved into this. Yes, at first it was a couple other things I was exploring. In Buddhist Tantra, there's three main phases. There's deity practice of visualizations. There's the Tumo and opening up the nervous system. And then the third is all about simply being, relaxing into being. And the first one, I at that time was not attracted to visualizing deities, but what I did do was visualize my entire physical body as a golden light body. So I would do that for 2 hours, do Tumo for 2 hours. There was another one of the 6 yogas of Naropa that I did for 2 hours, and then the simply sitting for 2 hours. And then I let go of a couple of things, and it evolved into the 4 hours, 4 hours.
I wonder if at first you felt tired by the amount of mental concentration required for the former two practices, just the concentration on the gold light body and then the Tumo. Like I just sense that that would take a lot of energy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. In fact, I did get quite tired at times. And not only tired, but I'd allow myself to take a nap. There's actually methods in Tibetan Buddhism for waking yourself up. And I didn't really resonate with that. I thought to myself, well, if my body needs some energy and needs to take a little nap, then why not simply allow that? So in the middle, I would take like half an hour nap, wake up really refreshed, and felt like, okay, I'm going to continue for the rest of the day now. And I'd feel great then, a lot more energy and continuing on through. So the whole powering through by certain techniques and methods has never been super resonant for
I
me.
love that. Just the idea of really being in flow and not like hustle and grinding your way through on this spiritual path to enlightenment, that it's really honoring where you are and what you feel called to.
Absolutely.
As you started this process, did you kind of have a deep confirmation or inner knowing that this was really right for me? Like not pursuing massage, not forcing yourself to do something. Did you kind of have this like sense as you were doing all this deep work of like, this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing right now?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It felt perfect. It was just right. I was in the flow, and there were numerous occasions where the flow proved to me that there was support. And that was kind of a first time that I really experienced that amount of support from the universe. And what a sensation of being touched. Like, wow, wow, there is sentience. There is this amazing support, this nurturing, this universal love. How beautiful.
Oh, that is. Could you tell us about, in the process of doing all this really deep meditation and your practices, what it was like when you experienced your Kundalini awakening?
Mm. So initially, it was all this energy I'd built up for months. All of a sudden, above the top of my head, it felt like the hugest orgasm I'd ever experienced, but it was outside my body. So it was strange that I could actually feel it. Of course, it's like, how do you feel if it's outside your body? But that was the experience. It felt like it was above the top of my head, about half a foot. And then the next day, this ocean of clear awareness started seeping in through the top of my head. And over the next few days, it became a flood, became this amazing, amazing flood that saturated every single cell of my whole body. Kundalini started up from the tailbone up over and over and over for days. Energies were let loose. my entire body became enveloped in this ocean of pure awareness until there was a sensation of being completely dissolved, like an experience of even seeing in my mind's eye my whole physical body completely falling apart and dissolving into dust. And then I sat up, I stood up, and then I realized it wasn't my physical body that was standing up. Looking at myself, all I could see was this clear silhouette.
Oh my gosh, that is so amazing. That is just blowing my mind. When this was all sort of unfolding, how were you sort of psychologically? Like, did you notice fear come along? Were you more just kind of in this phase of like, okay, I'm kind of surfing this wave and I'm just going with it? And like, where were you in it? Is it all unfolded?
Well, this clear and empty awareness was at first clear and empty, and then at some point it wasn't. The way I describe it now is I use the word bardo, astral realms, entities, bardo. There were experiences of different realms, experiences of different entities, low-level entities. And yes, soon my fear, my terror came up. And all this pure awareness was like a magnifying glass on the deepest parts of my conscious and unconscious, bringing up my deepest terror, my deepest fear, bringing up stories in my mind that push the buttons of my deepest terror. And I was able to sit with it and stay there for 28 days. So I was out there for almost a month. And at a certain point, actually, I left and I went home and realized, the terror was too much at one point. It was too much. I felt like I had bitten off more than I could chew. And this is an important lesson too. I mean, humility is a big piece. Pride can be, the driving force of someone whose ambition is enlightenment. And especially if you have a sensation of overcoming your fear. You might think, oh, I'm more deeply enlightened, but what I have seen is greater pride from that. And so here was not only an experience of this opening and overcoming some things, but also being so deeply overwhelmed with terror and fear that I ran away. And so in that humility, I learned about my pride.
Wow, and there's so many teachings in there on multiple levels. When you sort of observed all this and then you went away to take a break, did you get help from any type of spiritual teacher, or was it just kind of like getting a break from the intensity of the practice that sort of helped you to kind of come out of that and integrate it all? What was that process like?
Just going home, spending time with my partner at that time, it was incredibly helpful. There was a lot more experiences even that continued after I was at home, but the fear had dissolved at that point. This process was no longer shining light on my fear, but it was shining on unity, on bringing everything together within myself and without. Self and other, right? That's another dualistic aspect. And there were some teachers at that time that I went to seeking some help. And the next few years, actually, there were two women teachers. Jeannie Zandi was one, and Amachi, the hugging saint, was another, and experienced some deep, powerful, mystical states in their presence as well.
So just kind of continue to unfold this experience of just having the Kundalini open up, and then the awareness that came as a result and stayed with you after.
Yes.
Well, let's talk about jazz because you really have a very deep and unique perspective on discordant jazz and jazz. And I wonder if you could just tell us about how you got into jazz and the connection that you see between jazz and spirituality.
One of the first things I had said in this talk was about opening to the totality of the moment without separating anything. And the way we separate is through, I like that, I don't like this. So grasping and aversion, right? This is what creates the momentum of samsara, the momentum of our own hell realms. And in the totality of this moment, there is resonance and dissonance. So resonance often inspires us to grasp. Dissonance often inspires us to have aversion or to run away. So learning in my own process to be in both resonance and dissonance without moving, just feeling, just experiencing, and learning how this heals the psyche in the moment. The psyche is the moment. Everything in this totality of the moment is beautiful, and part of the whole. So even the horror that can be in the moment, even the tragedy, even the abuse, all of the, quote, evil that can be in the moment is also part of the moment. And when we are unconditioned and open, it's all part of the moment without separation. So jazz, especially discordant jazz, has a lot more dissonance than other types of music, in my experience. And in this tension, in this sweetness together, sweetness and tension, we discover the full journey. It's the rainbow with all the colors. And so when we can actually train our nervous system through discordant jazz, for example, to be open to the entire journey, to be open to the dissonance and the resonance. Like, how amazing, how beautiful.
This is so revelatory. When you first talked to me about this, it completely changed my understanding and appreciation for discordant jazz, the jazz that is not sort of the pretty package ballads, which I love. I love all kinds of jazz. However, when you first talked about this, I felt like I realized that in not being able to fully embrace discordant jazz, I was also rejecting parts of my own self. And that was painful and sobering, and also like beautiful at the same time to just kind of see it like that after you explain the way you see things. It was just like blasted me wide open.
How wonderful. Yes, parts of yourself as well.
Tell us about how you got into jazz and its assistance, that you got on your spiritual journey.
I was talking to a buddy of mine, and he's a musician and is really into Coltrane. And so he sent me some Coltrane music, and all of a sudden I'm just listening to this going, wow, how amazing. This is a perfect analogy for me in terms of the view of Padmasambhava's teachings. The view is undifferentiated experience of the moment. Undifferentiated. And so there I was listening to the sweet songs of Coltrane, and there were some tension notes in it, but then finding other albums where, there's a whole lot of dissonance in some of his later stuff, and discovering a transition of my nervous system to open up to that kind of dissonance. And over a period of about a year, I fell in love with some of the more dissonant experimental or free jazz, what they call it. And how amazing, how beautiful, because this is an analogy for life. We don't just have sweetness in life. We have tension, we have dissonance. And so can we be open to the moment? Can we be open to our lives just the way they are? Can we fully, heartfully be open to this moment without controlling, without pushing away, without grasping?
It really just completely changed my understanding of what the jazz is and how it represents parts of ourself. And it, I think, gave me a deeper understanding of what the artist like Coltrane was trying to do when he was experimenting and wanting to create and push the boundaries of form and sound. Can you say more about the connection to Buddhism and the heaven and hell realms you were exploring and the music and how that connected?
Well, there's 6 realms in Buddhist theory: hungry ghost, hell realm, animal realm, human realm, demigods, they're the ones that are fighting all the time, and then heaven realms. So heaven realms, you can be fully blissed out, you can be at total inner peace. So this is a interesting piece here. A lot of people who meditate discover these blissful or inner peace sort of states, and they try to stay there all the time. But that's actually considered to be a hell realm because it's not permanent, because we fall from those states. We can't exist all the time in pure bliss or pure peace. So once more, looking at dissonance. So another piece is, to an enlightened one, it is said that the 6 realms of suffering are like 6 Buddha realms. So what's different? Perspective, right? So to one who deeply experiences the non-existence of the inherent reality of appearances, to that one, everything is the Leela, everything is the play. It's all the Buddha realm. It includes all of it. It includes every color or every sound or every experience. And so, of course, the mind goes to, well, what about those really painful experiences? I don't want those.
Yes.
That can't be part of it.
We push that away. I do. I'm like,
Right. And I also remember hearing from some teachers that as long as we are in a physical body, there is going to be a certain level of aversion and fear, because the physical body does feel pain. It does feel pleasure. It does feel pain. If you're in a light body and, somebody comes at you with a knife in your light body, well, you're not even worried because it's not even going to be painful. It can't do anything to you. So this is an interesting piece. Shakyamuni said that the origin of suffering is dukkha. The best translation is craving. And more modern versions say that the origin of suffering is grasping and aversion. However, what initiated our coming into a physical body in the first place? I mean, there's a lot of different ideas about that, and I have a lot of friends that insist that it's part of the entire journey and, to find our joy in embodiment. And Buddha's insight was there's a certain craving that brings us into physical embodiment. And when we are in physical embodiment, it is inevitable to feel pain, loss, suffering. So for here and now, I'm not saying to try to become a spirit light body and dissociate. Not saying that at all. I'm simply saying right now, for where we are at in this physical body, to just understand how when we seek with great desire and obsessiveness in this physical realm, it often creates us more suffering.
Well, that was a message I really needed to hear, because I am just a neurotic queen of being obsessive and grasping in meditation. I think I mentioned to you, I will sit down sometimes and be like, okay, God, I'm going to sit and be peaceful. Just tell me the answers. Tell me what to do. Tell me now.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So when there are thoughts, when there are feelings, when there are sensations that are not pleasant, who is it that tries to run away from them? Well, it's the me, it's the self. So when the self is seen through, well, who's interpreting? Where is all that conditioning? Because all the conditioning is attached to the self. And not to say that all conditioning goes away. You know, we still have preferences. I remember Adyashanti said once, well, I still don't like to sleep on a bed of nails. I still prefer a real bed. All laughing our heads off at that one.
Well, essentially, like anything that we grasp at or that we want to push away, just like a discordant song that we think, oh, we don't like, that is then the rejection of these parts of ourselves. And that is like such a profound teaching, because I think I have a deep enough sense that we have to embrace all parts of ourselves. And I don't want to reject any part of myself. I want to be able to hold it all. And I think you're sort of saying, like, this hearing the music, the jazz embodies this of needing to just let all of ourselves be and accepted, and just, it's all part of God. If everything is God, everything's part of the universe. We can't reject or push away anything.
Exactly. And that would be the Christian mystic view. Everything is God. There's nothing but God. So there's nothing outside of God, because God is everything. So then to embody this in our daily life, each moment where we try to push something away, to remind ourselves, oh, that's God too. Oh, and this is God, and this is God, and this is God. And then at some point, you don't need that reminder anymore.
How since you don't need that reminder, obviously I do, you guys. How does that sit inside of you now? Like, you know, anything that you might notice an aversion to, or without pushing it away, and like without that reminder, like how internally do you speak to yourself, or do you experience that, if that makes sense?
Mm. Mm. This summer, I became quite social, which was very different for me. For years, I've been quite introverted and staying home quite a bit and mostly being a hermit. When shelter in place occurred, I was joking with some friends that my life hasn't changed at all. I'm still doing what I've always been doing for the last decade. So I really had a chance to see where a lot of my friends are at, and a lot of the people in the community that I've known through the years, and experience that I was quite different than I used to be. I didn't really realize it just spending years mostly by myself. But when I was with friends or acquaintances, it became more clear that there was a lot of grasping and aversion I used to have that is definitely less now. It has dwindled to a big degree. And it does feel like a very slow progression, because, well, I mean, with Adyashanti, that was around 2000, and then the Kundalini 2009. And so here we are now in 2024. So I'm not saying that I'm completely unconditioned. This is an ever deepening thing. This is a range. Enlightenment is not a on-off button. You know, this is a continuous deepening. One of my favorite stories, like, I feel Jesus was a very deeply enlightened being. And yet in the Garden of Gethsemane, the night before the Passion of Christ, the New Testament says, and Jesus sweat blood and tears. He came back to disciples who had fallen asleep, and he begged them, please wake up, pray with me, pray to our Father that this cup shall pass from me. He didn't want it. He was sweating blood and tears. He was terrified. He was afraid. So a being that deeply enlightened, also that deeply afraid. I mean, that's touching
Oh, it is.
to have his example.
It gives me chills. And like they say that is really where the true crucifixion took place, was in the Garden of Gethsemane, when it was the crucifixion of his will. The physical crucifixion was the symbol, but that was really where he had to completely surrender it all to God. And it's tough when what's accepting what we don't want to accept, which is just tying it back to the jazz, what the point that you were making. Now it's time to listen to some jazz. Due to copyright laws, we cannot play the music on air at this time. I respect copyright laws and the incredible artists who created the jazz we listen to, as without them, we would have no jazz. I will leave links to the songs we listen to so you can pause and listen to the songs along with us. It is my dream to someday grow this podcast to the point where I can eventually host it on a major streaming platform which owns the right to play music, so we can all have the communal experience of listening together. Until then, please bear with me. Let's listen to some jazz so we can just kind of get to it. And we're going to do a Coltrane. We had to do a Coltrane day because of your call to Coltrane, and also the fact that Coltrane is just one of the most amazing artists because of all of because of like everything who he is, the discordant music, the gorgeous ballads, everything. Like, he is someone that really, I think, had done a lot of deep work on himself, like really was just a special being. So we're going to start off with a song that is from his 1962 residence that he did. I'm going to read it a little bit here, and Patricio will clean up my ands and ums here. Patricio, thank you. So this was an album called Impressions, and it's John Coltrane with Eric Dolphy. And this is when they did a series of concerts at the Village Vanguard. And this was after John Coltrane's spiritual awakening, after he had kicked heroin, which you know about. And so he had really turned his life to dedicate his life to serving God and serving humanity. And he and Eric Dolphy were just kind of really experimenting with different types of jazz, free jazz, and it's a beautiful live recording. And I thought we could start here. And before we did that, I just wanted to read a little bit about what they said they were sort of trying to do here. They were both, John Coltrane and Eric Dolphy, very sensitive souls. And they also got a lot of criticism for the music that they played. This music was written up by a music critic who said he had heard them performing together in Los Angeles. And after they were in Los Angeles in 1961, they went out in the summer and played in New York. And this critic wrote, "At Hollywood's Renaissance Club recently, I listened to a horrifying demonstration of what appears to be a growing anti-jazz trend exemplified by these foremost proponents, Coltrane and Dolphy, of what is termed avant-garde music." So I'm just giving us some historical context, because when this music first came out, people did not like it. Obviously, this was the critics' response to it. And so I found this article where an interviewer wanted to really sit down with Coltrane and Dolphy and understand what they were trying to do. And he also implies in this article, it's from Downbeat Magazine, April 12th, 1962, that Coltrane and Dolphy were really affected by all of the negativity, that maybe this hampered their experimenting in some ways for a period of time after. When John Coltrane was asked by the interviewer, really, what is he trying to do with music? This is what he said. I think the main thing a musician would like to do is give a picture to the listener of the wonderful things he knows and senses in the universe. That's what music is to me. It's just another way of saying this is a big, beautiful universe we live in, that it's been given to us. And here's an example of just how magnificent and encompassing it is. That's what I would like to do. I think that's one of the greatest things you can do in life, and we all try to do it in some way. The musicians is through his music. Wow. So that is so beautiful. So this is, before we go in to hear this piece, this is the intention that John Coltrane was carrying. We already heard the tension of the critic who's sort of saying, no, I can't handle this new realm. So let's go hear this piece, Impressions, live from the Village Vanguard, John Coltrane and Eric Dolphy. And let me know if the volume is okay. And everyone who's listening right now, this is the time to pause and go to the link list, and you can listen to the song while we are doing it as well. And then you can come back and hear your reactions, our reactions to it, and kind of reflect on that yourself.
That first piece reminded me of a playful little excitable wind tossing a leaf around. And I can see the images that come up, and, it's free, it's excitable, it's playful. And then the second part of it felt like a party where everyone is socializing. You got different kinds of socializations. You might have playful, sweet, resonant. You might have arguing. You might have different kinds of interactions. And some people might be short. Some people might be tall. Some people might be dressed beautifully. Some people might not be dressed so beautifully. And just all the different types and the different styles. And anyways, those are kind of like the little stories that arise. But simply being in the rawness of it felt freeing, felt free. When I first got into jazz, I thought I was acclimating my nervous system to dissonance. And I talked to an African-American man who said to me, well, Coltrane wasn't thinking about dissonance or resonance. He was just free. He was using the whole pure potential. And how beautiful is that?
It's so beautiful. For me, when I heard this piece, there is kind of like a real sweet playfulness to it. And I feel like compared to some of the other pieces that he's done, this is like discordant, but like light in the sense that like it's very playful. I feel like we hear each of the different instruments. Like there's John Coltrane there on the saxophone, and then the piano sort of had its own voice. And this is McCoy Tyner, by the way. McCoy Tyner is on the piano. It's his original quartet that also showed up here at the Village Vanguard in this piece. I think for me, there's a sense when I hear this of like a bursting forth, or just like wanting to just kind of let all this energy go. And I really resonated when you said children sort of playing, and then there's kind of all these other life scenes happening about people being dressed in different ways, and maybe there's some arguing. There is kind of like an underlying quality of sweetness to this song for some reason. I'm not quite sure. Like I can't put my finger on it, but it feels like, maybe this is just my projection, but like there's, the musicians are maybe almost knowing that they're in this kind of like experimental stage, and like lovingly encouraging each other on is kind of the vibe it feels like that's here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we bet that there was a lot of improv going on too, and vibing off of each other.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they had this quartet.
How amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I simply love how a lot of the greats in jazz were able to improv on the fly. And their talent seemed to come out in the moment in this spontaneous way, and they could play off of each other and explore nuances of various themes with each other in this improvisation. How amazing to improv with this kind of talent.
As you're saying that, that really makes me think of like what a deep level of trust they needed to have with one another, and also just how vulnerable they are and really putting themselves out there like this. Because as we heard, this concert was performed after this critic had sort of strong words about it, but like just to continue to go forth and put yourself out there knowing that not everyone's going to like it. Well, let's hear another
Right.
song. We're going to hear 3 songs today. So we now are going to hear a song from Stellar Regions. And this album was posthumously released by John Coltrane's estate. I believe his wife, Alice Coltrane, found the material for this, and then it was recorded or released after that. John Coltrane's on the tenor saxophone. Alice Coltrane is on the piano. Jimmy Garrison is on the bass, and Rashid Ali is a new addition here on drums. So the song I chose for us from this album is called Seraphic Light, and it's another long one. So if you're listening along, go ahead and go to the list and listen to it, and we will talk about how we feel and what it brings up for us. All right, here we go. Seraphic Light. Oh, we went out into the universe again with Coltrane. What was that piece like to experience for you? Just your thoughts, feelings, reflections?
I love that piece. It doesn't have anything to do with being in the cookie cutter mold. It's just pure, wild, and free, using everything.
What is it in terms of like a state of feeling? What do you notice about the emotions that come up hearing a piece like this?
It's beautiful. It feels beautiful, but in a deep way. Sometimes when I'm listening to music that's only in the major scale, there's beauty, but it feels a little more shallow sometimes to me. And so here, it just felt like it had a depth. And in terms of emotions, I don't know, I felt happy, I felt free. I feel the joy of that freedom. It was a big, joyful ride for me.
I think ride is such a good word. I started to close my eyes since I noticed you doing that too, and I think that really helped me because I realized that even though I love jazz and I'm so saturated in it, like almost 24/7, there's a way that I still have my mind like very active when I'm hearing music, and like it almost interferes with just the sensory experience of letting it wash over you. And so I had this feeling of like almost being like shot out of a cannon, like you use the word freedom, like just kind of a little kid just playing and going in all different directions. And it felt so like he was like surfing out in the universe. And I noticed really this time, I think Alice Coltrane's piano solo, like the little kind of lyrical miss, it was like she was kind of nudging the piece along and helping it flow. And then at the end, it felt like he went really far out, but then he really came back. Like there was a real denouement of the song. Like he was like containing us once again, or like after all of like the wild expanse, he kind of like brought us back. And that felt very emotionally containing to me. And I also noticed that I had some thoughts coming up during this piece of uncertainty, kind of like, okay, this music is happening, this is unfolding. Like, what does it mean? Like, and then I just was like, it's okay. There's uncertainty right now. So it's just really all there.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Wonderfully said. And very end too, where he's doing slow, a few notes, like a ballad, containing it within some notes of the major scale. Yeah, it's like he's bringing it back to sweetness after this wild, joyful ride, and bringing back a bit of sweetness towards the end. And yes, Alice Coltrane's piano is absolutely amazing, and how the two of them weave together, so gorgeous. And I'm sure they're falling in love, and playing music together was like an expression of that falling in love. Like, how amazing.
He picked up right after her solo ended, just like effortlessly. It was, I think, very beautiful, and outpouring of what you were saying. And this recording, it was done in 1967. So this is one of the later recordings he did before the end of his life. So that feels important too for historical context. All right. Yes. Well, we have been out into the universe with Coltrane. And as we spoke about him, he was somebody that could really feel the highest of highs, the lowest of lows. And there was a part of him, too, that could just play ballads more beautifully, probably, than anybody on the planet. Maybe Charlie Parker and Miles Davis had this, too. So I thought we might hear a ballad just to hear another side of John Coltrane. I think the most astounding thing about just the array of music we're hearing today, and you even said this to me, too, before, Rickson, was just that it all emanated from the same person. And their different interior states of being that he is letting us see and be. So with that, we are now going to hear I'm Old Fashioned. And this is from his seminal album, Blue Train. So let us hear I'm Old Fashioned. All right. I chose long ones for us today. Each piece is about 8 minutes. So if you're listening along with us, pause and listen to this song, and then you can reflect with us when we are done. Oh, simply lovely. And this was different than the first two pieces we've heard. What did you notice for this piece as you listened along? The feeling states that came over you, your associations, any reflections that arose?
Easy going. He's going dissonant light in this one, so it's a feeling of easy going, sweet, relaxed, laid back. Yeah, that's the mood that I feel listening to this last piece.
I think for me, as I started to hear it, I started to cry at the beginning, and then I was like, oh no, my makeup's gonna run and look terrible. And I started to just feel overwhelmed by, I'll probably cry again, like this profound gratitude just to be here now, just to even hear this music.
Yeah.
And be doing this with you. And you guys, I'm a crier. I'll definitely cry on this podcast. I'm not fragile, but I am sensitive. And there was a way in which there was such beautiful harmony with all of the instruments. John Coltrane, Lee Morgan on the trumpet, who had a lovely solo. The piano, it was almost like a family, like all of them just like individually speaking, and being in peace. Just absolutely beautiful. Well, we really covered a lot of ground today with Coltrane, with spirituality, with what dissonance is and how dissonance can help us understand and embrace and love parts of ourselves. And it was just so wonderful to be here with you, Rigzin. I'm so grateful. There's a Buddhist concept, you might be able to tell me exactly where it comes from, that someone told me about, and it is called a dedication of merit. And it's the idea that after you do some work like you did today, coming here and sharing your journey with us and being open and vulnerable and teaching me and reflecting on the music and just being so open-hearted, that all this work you did, you can dedicate it to a cause in the world, perhaps a loved one, just, something that you're thinking about. And so for all the beautiful work you did today, who would you want to dedicate your dedication of merit to? What is on your heart before we end?
Well, for the benefit of all beings, may this be dedicated to the evolution of the species of all sentient life.
That's so beautiful. Thank you. I think for me today, I will go with the war in Ukraine. As recently, we've all seen the news. It's been 2 years since this invasion, the war started, and there's been so much bloodshed and death on the part of Russians, of Ukrainians, and I hope with much depth in my heart that this war is over, and that any merit today that came from our work can go to contribute to peace and end the war. Well, thank you so much, Rigzin, for being here. It was just an absolute pleasure. I learned so much from you. And
thank you. Thank you for having me here. So wonderful to be on your podcast here and listening to Coltrane, the great. And he is such a deep part of me, part of my heart, listening to his music. And I love just resonating. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, you're so welcome. There were 2 teachers here today, one you, and then second Coltrane, who continues to teach us from the great beyond. Thank you for listening, reflecting, and being present with us today. Please leave us a review and comment, as we love feedback and aim to continuously improve and innovate, embodying the spirit of jazz itself. Jazz Therapy is edited and produced by Patricio Garcia. Sage Salmon is our social media coordinator. To connect with us, find us on Instagram and TikTok. Our email is info@jazztherapy.com. Check back next week for our next episode. May Jazz Therapy soothe your soul.